Vamos chamar a Jane, então?
Bora!
Pessoal, a Jane Hart é uma inspiração há muito tempo. Ela está há muito tempo pensando já nesse modelo diferente. Ela é do Center for Learning and Performance and Technology, C4LPT, mas especialmente ela escreve todo dia, sigam ela no Twitter, e ela vai contar para a gente um pouquinho dessa visão, das pesquisas que ela fez, de uma abordagem que chama 4Ds. Eu acho que é uma maneira maravilhosa da gente entender. Vamos ver a vinheta dela. Hi Jane, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Wow, I love her background. That is awesome. I want to be in the moon too, or whatever you are.
Oh, Jane, I have to say to all of the guys that you speak Portuguese, but even though you're not delivering this talk in Portuguese, mas ela fala português, pessoal. Mas a gente não tem problema, né, Debbie?
Não, não tem. Eu ia relembrar todo mundo, porque todas as sessões em inglês estão com tradução simultânea. Então, vocês podem entrar no link, né, ou na sala que tem a tradução simultânea, e também ficarem mandando as perguntas durante a sessão da Jane, que a gente vai ter o Q&A no final.
So, Jane, we've just telling
worry.
them that they have simultaneous translation. You got, right? You got everything? So, take care. Toma cuidado. Ó. Isso entende tudo que a gente falar. Jane, it's a pleasure having you here to open the second day of this Festival de Cultura de Aprendizagem. So, thank you a lot, and please, the stage is yours.
Thank you. Can you just confirm what time you want me to finish?
30 minutes is great.
30 minutes to stop, and then we have some questions after that?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Right. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me to start your second day. And as you may have mentioned, I live in the UK, and I've been working in the learning and development business for more than 25 years now. So in the recent years, I've been focusing on helping organizations modernize their approaches to workplace learning. Not just through digitization, but by rethinking the way that learning is enabled and supported in their organization. And for sure, not many have been interested up to now and to doing that. But of course, this last year has been very different. And we've seen a lot of people beginning to digitize their training offerings. But I think it's a big opportunity to rethink the whole approach to learning and development within an organization, and in fact the role of the learning and development team in that organization too. So in my presentation today, I first want to share with you some of the results of some surveys that I've been running on how people are learning today, and then think about what that means for a new approach to workplace learning, which I call modern workplace learning. So let's start with some very simple question. What do we mean by workplace learning? I see the sun's coming in my window. It's going to shift a little bit. So on the screen, I hope you'll see, I've got a slide here on the definition. Okay, so the traditional definition of learning is the acquisition of knowledge or skills through study, experience, or being taught. But it's for most people, it's the being taught piece that they kind of focus on, because that's how they understand or think about learning. They've been in a classroom with a teacher for many years. And of course, in the workplace, then, the focus is very much on training as the main way to help people learn in the workplace. But for me, workplace learning is a much bigger concept than that. It's not about just participating in many different training events, but continuously learning in a number of different ways. So what are those ways? Well, for the last 14 years, I've been running a top tools for learning survey. And this has revealed not just the most popular tools for learning, but also some interesting features about the way people learn. And in particular, it shows that people are learning in what I call the 4 Ds of learning. And that's because they begin with the letter D. Now, of course, they learn from didactics, being taught or trained, and this includes classroom training and virtual training and online courses and so forth. And we usually refer to that as formal learning. But they also learn through discovery. That's by finding things out themselves, through searching or browsing on the web, making use of web resources like videos and podcasts and articles and so forth. And we tend to refer to that as informal or even personal learning. But they also learn through discourse by interacting with their work colleagues or others in professional events or even on their social networks like Twitter or LinkedIn. And we call that social learning. But they also learn from doing the day job and their everyday work experiences, as well as feedback from their managers and their coaches. And we tend to refer to that as sometimes as experiential learning. The question is, where does most of an individual's learning take place? Where does most of your learning take place? Is it in didactics, in training? Is it through discovery? Well, I've been asking that question on a survey on my website for a little while now and asking people to put a percentage on where they learn, a rough percentage. It's obviously impossible to complete one. So where do they learn most? And here are some of the results that the average percentage that people say they learn from. They say they learn from about 34% from discovery, 31% from doing the day job, 21% from discourse, talking to people, and 14%, around 14% from being trained, didactics, and so forth. So in fact, the majority of people believe they learn most from discovery and doing. Now, as I said, these are average percentages. And in fact, when we look at the age profile, it's slightly different. The youngest employees, that's the ones in this column on the left here, under 30, for instance, they tend to think, they believe they learn slightly more from didactics, that blue number at the bottom of that column. Slightly more from didactics and doing the day job than discovery, than the average values that I showed you. And this actually reverses as people get older. So for instance, the 60s, for instance, believe they learn more from discovery than doing the day job or discourse. But again, nevertheless, it's clear that most learning across the age groups comes from discovery and doing. And yet it's didactics, isn't it, where L&D teams put most of their effort and focus. But let's dig a little deeper now and consider how frequently people learn from each of these 4 Ds of learning. And another survey asked people to say how often they learn from each of these itemized ways of learning on this graphic, whether it was daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, yearly, or even less. Well, the results are again interesting. And I'm going to show you a chart now that shows you some of the results. Now, at the top here in the columns, D's, daily, W, weekly, M, monthly, Q, quarterly, and so forth. And as you can see on the left, that many people are learning quite frequently, daily, in fact, from a number of these activities, from work-based activities, from reading articles and blog posts, from interacting with their colleagues, from web searching and web browsing, watching videos and listening to podcasts, and actually tends to be the younger people under 40s who are learning more in that way on a daily basis. But once again, I think it's clear that all these activities fall into the discovery, doing, and discourse categories. Whilst learning from the didactical activities like classroom training take place far less frequently. You can see down the bottom half of this chart, monthly perhaps for live virtual training, going down to sort of classroom training and scheduled courses less than a year. And so again, the didactical activities are where L&D place their focus. So the next question I wanted to ask was, which of these ways of learning offer the most value to people? And here are the results of my survey. Again, which of these ways offer the most value? So let's have a look at this slide that's coming up now. Here we go. So here are the results, and these are the ranked order. So first place that people value the most, the learning from the most, comes from work-based activities, job-based activities, followed by interaction with colleagues, web searching, manager feedback, web resources, coach mentor feedback, interacting with the professional network, company resources, live virtual training up on the top left there, online courses, conferences down the bottom right, and top left, classroom training. Well, I think you're beginning to see a pattern here. The most valued ways to learn are the experiences and activities that happen as part of daily work, interaction with people, and through use of informal web content and discovery, whilst the least valued ways are those ways of traditional training, the learning activities, virtual and classroom training. So if we plot the frequency of learning and the value of learning onto a chart, let's have a look at what that looks like. And I think you can see the daily activities on the left, and then followed by the weekly activities and so forth. And then the numbers are the values that people place on these activities. There's quite a high correlation between the learning that takes place frequently and the value people put on it. But as I've said a number of times now, it's the traditional training activities, the ones that take place infrequently and are less valued, where learning and development teams place their effort. So it seems for me that, that all this data shows that we need to think about workplace learning in a different way. It's not going to be just about digitizing those traditional training activities. We need to have a new culture, a new mindset about what workplace learning is. And that's what modern workplace learning is all about. And for me, there are three key principles of modern workplace learning. The first is that, in the workplace, people are employees, workers, rather than learners. In other words, they go to work, unlike students that go to school or college to learn. So if we call our people learners, then we're kind of reinforcing that old approach about thinking about learning in a classroom and studying and so forth. But if we think about them as workers, then we think about learning in the context of work and integrating it into the workflow. So in other words, it's more important, I think, that we think about the working environment and their workers, and that's their prime role, rather than a learning environment and providing and focusing on learners. And the next thing I think we need to think about too is that learning is not a synonym for training. So it's not learning equals training or training equals learning. Learning is not a product. It's something, it happens up here. It can't be designed, delivered, or managed. It happens, as we've seen, in so many ways, informal and informal, designed and non-designed. So we can't just assume that learning only happens through a training process. And in fact, that means, therefore, that we need to support and enable all these ways of learning. So what does that look like? Well, I think one important aspect, one key way, is through the promotion of continuous self-learning and self-development, empowering and enabling people to do more for themselves in the ways that suit them best. A second thread is supporting continuous learning from the work that ensures that people, get the most out of their daily work, so their work-based learning experiences don't go to waste. And thirdly, of course, we need to think about providing modern training that's much more reflective of the ways that people prefer to learn for themselves at work, and is integrated as much in the workflow, rather than just focusing on those activities at the very bottom right-hand corner. Now, you're probably saying L&D teams can't do all this themselves, and that's true. they can no longer manage or provide and manage everything. Everyone needs to learn to do their job now or to prepare for the future. So in the modern workplace, learning is everyone's responsibility, not just L&D departments. It's the managers, it's the individuals, and of course, it's the learning development teams. And these are not separate activities. If we look at this graphic, for instance, we can see that these responsibilities are actually overlapping. Individuals will need to take more responsibility for their own continuous self-learning and development to stay relevant in their jobs. Managers will need to take more responsibility for the growth and development of their teams and not just pass this off to L&D departments. And they need to do much more to support the continuous learning from the job. And learning and development teams will, of course, need to do some training for sure. But as I said earlier, it needs to be much more relevant for today's workforce, integrated in the workflow. And they need to think much more about building, enabling, and supporting a continuous learning culture in the organization by supporting individuals' continuous self-learning through continuous learning on the job, as well as supporting modern managers in their new roles. So as I said, in other words, there are three key areas: modern training, promoting continuous self-learning and self-development, and supporting continuous learning from the work. Now, there is an awful lot I could say about all these activities and what they mean in practice, but for the next half of this rest of this presentation, I'd just like to explain very briefly what I mean by each of these three areas. So I'm going to start with supporting continuous learning from the work. So here's a slide here that I'd show you. And there we go. Now, the workplace is a vibrant learning environment. We've said that. And even when work takes place remotely, this can still be the case. But we need a number of things we need to help workers, individuals. Firstly, both of them, individuals and the workers, will need to think differently about how they can get more out of their daily work. Now, managers are the key to building a successful continuous learning environment at work. So I think L&D's role will be to inspire modern managers to take more responsibility for the growth and development of their teams. And that doesn't just mean putting them on a management course, but taking time to sit with them and consider a number of issues about what motivates today's workforce, how to foster flexibility and freedom, how to build a growth mindset, how to give regular feedback, and in fact become more of a coach and a boss. And when it comes to employees, it's about fostering modern workers so that they can thrive in this new workplace. And that includes helping them or encouraging them to solve their own problems, performance problems, managing their manager, rather than just waiting to be spoon-fed everything. They need to do their job. And one way individuals can be helped to get more out of the daily work is to encourage some reflective practices. After all, as John Dewey said, we don't learn from experience, we learn from reflecting on experience. So in order to become more aware of their daily learning experiences, perhaps recommend them to take some time to reflect on what they've done each day. Now, reflective practice is more than just having a quick think about the day, but taking a bit of time to record key experiences from the day, perhaps in a work journal, on your laptop. And by doing so, individuals begin to realize what they are getting out of their work, what they're learning from their job. And then, of course, they can share that, anything of significance anyway, with their colleagues. Now, although knowledge sharing doesn't require any special social tools to take place, Some of the new social technologies we do have in place, like Teams and Yammer and Slack, can make that process a lot easier. And of course, they're using these platforms now much more for remote work. But managers can be helped to realize that these very same platforms can be used to share knowledge and experience within the team itself. So for learning development, there's a great opportunity to work with managers and their teams to help them get the most out of these platforms to build a sharing culture within the organization. So let's move on now to the second stream, which was promoting continuous self-learning and self-development. And there are a couple of things I want to mention briefly in this context. And the first is think about encouraging your people to build a daily self-learning habit. You know, by just spending 20 to 30 minutes a day on finding something out for themselves can add real rewards. And as we saw earlier, reading is the most frequent learning activity. One of the easiest things to do on a daily basis, like watching videos and listening to podcasts. And of course, your role will then be to help them understand the opportunities, the huge opportunities to open to them on the web, if they're not already aware of them. But more than this, it's also going to be important to help them develop their modern learning skills so they can get the most out of this daily learning experiences. Things like ensuring that they don't get overwhelmed by lots of information and helping them make sense of what they find and seeing patterns in what they find for themselves. But many organizations, you know, sometimes that's a step too far and they prefer to adopt a more formal process of self-development. And that's beginning to happen now. And in fact, empowering individuals to make decisions about their own professional goals aligned with business goals and how they can address them themselves can bring substantial benefits to both sides. And once again, they're probably going to need to have to record that in some way or other, because if organizations are going to give time for it, they want to see that that time has been accounted for. So now, when we think about modern training, we can think about things that we can do to ensure that we can support these other ways of learning. As I said, by making it more reflective of the way people learn themselves, integrate it as much in the workflow. So here's just a few examples to think about. So first of all, when it comes to think about content or creating content, then focus on creating flexible resources, things you can do quickly and easily, short and simple formats that can be used flexibly. And by that, I mean for different purposes, for just-in-time learning or for performance support. And you don't need sophisticated or content authoring tools to do that. As long as you apply just some principles of modern content design, you can make good use of your tools like Office, Word, and PowerPoint. There's actually quite a lot you can do with them. But if you want to help learning to become a short, regular activity, not an infrequent, time-consuming one, then think about delivering some micro-training on a daily or regular basis. In fact, if you just provided a little bit of something, a new technique, a tip, idea, a resource on a daily, or at least a very regular basis, you can start to build knowledge and skills over time. And don't overlook tools like email or instant messaging apps like WhatsApp for targeted micro training. They can work very well and are very familiar to people. And remember, of course, you don't need to have to create all this stuff yourself. Curating resources from the web is not only a valuable way to help busy workers build a daily learning habit, it's also a way of supporting individual self-development initiatives. But remember, curation is more than aggregation. It's about selecting or cherry picking the most relevant resources organising them in the most appropriate format, and adding some value to them. So my MWL, Modern Workplace Learning Daily, is exactly that. It's a daily blog post delivered by email with a link to a useful article or resource that's just come about, with a question to think about, apply it to your own situation, and then a link to go further to delve into more detail. Just drip feed it on a daily or week daily basis. But when it comes to live virtual training, I've already mentioned how this has taken off this year out of necessity. But simply converting classroom training into virtual training has led to many other problems like Zoom fatigue as people go from web meeting to web training. So it's important these sessions are effective. So if you think there's a need for some live virtual training, then it needs to be short, interactive, and collaborative as possible. It's better to run a number of short sessions than, say, one long one. And don't just think of it as a training tool, make use of it to host informal sessions for remote team building, virtual lunch and learns, and virtual book club meetings. And that way you can offer much more continuous learning opportunities. But when it comes to thinking about training a team or group, it doesn't have to be done synchronously. Consider facilitating a series of short, collaborative, asynchronous sessions over a period of time, and ideally perhaps host them in group space on your organization's social collaboration platform like Teams or Slack, as that means they can be truly integrated into the workflow. And this is how I've been running my own workshops over the last 10 years or more in Yammer or Slack by using a dedicated group for those workshops. But if you think there's a need to provide something a bit more complex, then consider a hybrid learning approach. That's the new term we're talking about nowadays. And there are a number of definitions of hybrid learning, but essentially it's one that combines flexibility of self-paced online learning with highly engaging live experiences. But if you are redesigning your learning programs to ensure that they are appropriate for today's remote working circumstances, then think about some more modern approaches for hybrid learning. Perhaps a learning campaign, which is a series of resources and activities delivered over a period of time, not just all bundled up into one course. And finally, rather than keeping all your learning initiatives locked up in your LMS or other closed platform, then build a learning hub and open up access to all your learning opportunities, whether they be internal, external, formal, informal, individual, social. Provide appropriate signposts and navigation for those who help to find things of relevance and value. So there we have it, modern workplace learning in practice. That's all those activities I've been explaining about the last few minutes. And if we map them back onto that diagram of the frequency and value of learning, what you can see now is that we've moved the support enablement away from the activities that take place in the bottom right-hand corner, the less frequent ones, that help learning become much more of a regular activity and more that happens in the workflow. So just to finish, I'd like to ask you what you're thinking about doing. What are you planning on doing? What are you going to be focusing on in the future? Again, I've been asking people that as a question on my website, and interesting, here are some of the recent results. And you can see that in this column on the right-hand side, we've got I, which is implemented, P, planned, and not planned. And you can see that a lot of work's been going on in the modern training area, shall we say, at the top. And then we've got in the middle area, probably more things that are happening in the sort of sporting continuous learning at work type of thing. And down at the bottom, perhaps less implemented, are the promoting continuous self-learning activities. But you know, for me, they are probably the most important ones. They're the ones that can really bring some value to the organisation, to give people more opportunity to do things for themselves. So think about those. Don't just think because they're at the bottom list, they're not invalid. I think they really can add something extra. Okay, so time's pressing on. Final slide. If you'd like to find out more, here's where you can go. The address is at the bottom, modernworkplacelearning.com. If you go to have a look at the introductory element of this resource, it's free to view. You can see all the surveys, all the results I've given you, all the graphics, which you can get hold of if you want to, and just read more deeply about what I've said today. The full resource you can get access to also if you'd like to. On the right-hand side, you can see you can sign up for the Modern Workplace Learning Daily, that daily post I mentioned. Just subscribe by email and that will come to you free every weekday. And if you really want to do something a bit more concerted, then perhaps sign up for one of my workshops. Well, this is the one that's running at the moment, Modern Training Part 1, but the workshops are there to support all these different areas of modern workplace learning. So thanks for listening. Hopefully there's some questions you have and I'll be able to answer. Thank you.
Hi, I know I heard you talk a lot about this, but it's so good to listen all over again. You always have new insights, so it's very good. Just one question regarding the last slide. For this group that has started this Monday, can they still get into the group?
Yeah, that one. Yeah, keeping that one open for a bit longer.
Yeah.
I mean, the good thing about these workshops is that they are asynchronous. You haven't got to do everything at a specific time, so you can always catch up with stuff. But it's important to do it in your own time. Fit it into your own life. You know, I don't expect that have to fit into, you know, for you to fit into my schedule. I want to fit into your schedule. So yes, it's.
But I remember that when I took the workshop, every other week I was listening, I have to catch up with the content. In a way, you have a kind pressure that was very good for my organization. So
I don't want to force people to do things. Nice when they do. I mean, and this one that started, there are a lot of people doing some good stuff. So it's great to share because they're sharing all the work they're producing, and you know, it opens people's eyes. Oh, they're doing that. That's interesting. Good to hear.
So a gente tem um monte de pergunta, né, gente, aqui para ela, e a gente escolheu duas. We're gonna pick 2 questions. And deixa eu pegar o telefone aqui.
Do you want me to start?
Yeah.
Eu começo então. So Jane, love everything you said. Like Conrado was saying here in Portuguese, the chat was on fire. People have many questions for you, but we picked 2, and Conrado will have a third. So his own question. So the first one is, how do we apply the model that you just showed to organizations, actually to hierarchized structures led?
Ela saiu, ela ficou na quarentena. Sim. Teve 105 anos e aí tá.
10 dias. Eram 10 dias.
Sua família inteira umas 200 vezes.
Purei as crianças.
Mas ela tá bem, super bem.
Não dá, já máscara e óculos não tem como.
And we get back to you.
Yes, it was a tough answer, so it was very good for you to have 1 minute to think so that you can properly answer it.
Isso, pessoal, só um minutinho aqui com o áudio.
A gente está organizando aqui.
Dá tempo ainda de ficar mandando mais perguntinhas. O pessoal também está no chat aqui da Nove, acompanhando.
E tem uma coisa interessante também, gente, que eu não sei se ficou claro lá, aquele primeiro capítulo, eu acho que, putz, tem uma resposta super legal. E tem uma outra coisa também, que eu fiz uma versão da pesquisa dela. I'm telling them about the research that we've made using your. You know, remember that we use your questionnaire for the local. E aí algumas pessoas perguntaram. Eu vou publicar na semana que vem o resultado da pesquisa dela com os dados brasileiros. Eu mandei para ela antes e acho que é um jeito bom de vocês.
Isso é muito
podem
bom,
comparar.
porque o pessoal sempre pergunta, né? Fala, mas lá fora dá certo, como que aqui? E a gente acaba vendo que lá fora também não é tão fácil assim, pessoal. Também tem muito comando e controle.
Tem. Só checando um
Back,
pouquinho.
também ainda aqui continuando.
E uma coisa também, gente, de todo o material da palestra, das palestras de uma maneira geral, a gente vai buscar o tempo certo de soltar não só os artigos todos, a gente tem direito de muitos a gente tem direito de tradução, a gente vai liberar alguns vídeos também. Então, assim, se vocês perguntaram quando é que eu posso ver o vídeo, a gente vai botar legenda em todos e vai soltando aos poucos, de acordo com a autorização dos palestrantes. E mesmo os artigos, a gente quer sempre ter uma versão em inglês e português. Eu acho que a gente ainda tem uma necessidade grande, né?
Sim, e vai rolar trilha na Degree?
Vai rolar uma trilha na The Grid
Olha.
maravilhosa. A gente vai contar mais.
A gente já tem uma, né? De resiliência, inteligência emocional. Logo quando aconteceu a pandemia, foi sensacional. A Novi já levantou a mão e falou, como que eu ajudo o pessoal? E a gente criou uma trilha na The Grid sobre resiliência e inteligência emocional. Está ali liberada para vocês.
Tá. Jane, let's see if we can hear you. No, it's from, é do lado dela ou não? Okay, Jane, I'm going to send you the questions. I'm going to ask you to send a video or write it down so that we can have some technical issues here. But thank you a lot for your time, and we'll chase you for having the two, because they have another question that was very good also.
A lot.
So we're going to send you, and hopefully we can listen back to you from you.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Jane.
Bye-bye.
Bye.